So I'm glad everyone could make it for the last-minute interpretive dance class. It's wonderful. My name's Amber, and I'll be chairing this afternoon for these lovely people here for the panel. This panel will be addressing engaging with Aboriginal people about waste and recycling. So like I said, I'll be chairing the panel. Excuse me. And I suppose I should introduce myself. So my name's Amber, and my role, usually day-to-day professional life, is I'm a lecturer at Griffith University with First Australian Social Justice, and in my spare time, cultural mindfulness workshops, which I had the deepest pleasure to run one yesterday, which with quite a few people here, so it was really awesome. Without further ado, I'd also like to just do a humble acknowledgement of the original custodians of this country, the Gumbaynggirr people. So I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and the ancestors and spirits of this country. I'm lucky to call this country my home. It's actually my home as in country, so I'm of Gumbaynggirr heritage. I think I need to introduce everyone else as well, so thank you for being here, and I'm going to hand it over to Danielle to introduce herself this afternoon.
Hi, I'm Danielle Carter, the Manager Regional Delivery from the Environment Protection Authority. My team works on council programs to improve waste and recycling and Aboriginal communities as well.
Hi, I'm Kate Brown. I'm a Senior Project Officer with Waste Aid, and we're working in discrete communities out in far western New South Wales, managing waste in Brewarrina, Burke and Walgett.
My name's Trent Wood. I work in the New South Wales Regional Land Council. I'm based in the Coast Harbour office, and I oversee 38 land councils from Weirgate and Brewarrina out to Kinnabarra.
Hi, my name's Tash, and I work with North East Waste, which is the regional waste group in the Northern Rivers. And I've been working with a couple of the communities up there, which I'll show you more a bit later.
Hold on. Okay, I'm just going to keep trying to multitask here. Okay, so I'm just going to do a little bit of discussion, I suppose, to give some background to what we're going to be talking a little about for the rest of the discussion. So to really begin giving background knowledge, we kind of need to cover a little history. So just to begin looking at what people are up against in terms of their profession working with Indigenous communities. I'm actually going to grab that other mic. So I suppose the first place we really need to start is beginning to look at the actual communities. So when workers are going into missions or reserves, and from what I understand, there's certain waste management issues, and really there's a lot of social issues in these communities as well. So to really begin to place that in context, we need to kind of understand, firstly, what missions and reserves are. Just to give you an idea, does anybody here have any knowledge about that? Just raising of hands or nods is fine. Does anyone have any knowledge around that? Yeah, we have. So a couple of hands, but not heaps. So just to start with, missions were in the control of churches and missionaries with little or no government involvement, hence the name missions, yeah? So really they were religious-based, they were there, I suppose, to tame the natives, so to speak. It didn't work, nah. So these were really, evangelistic and really part of the times when people came here. It was really about beginning to not only colonise the land, but colonise the people within that space as well. And so the reserves and stations, generally run by the government, churches, etc. I would also like to say that some of the stations were actually further on in time were probably private, and that Indigenous people were used more for labour in those spaces. So it's complex. There are a few different... I decided to just make it pretty clear by including those two, because that's probably what most people will work with professionally when they work in missions and reserves. There were also reserves, say, where Indigenous people really broke away to kind of hide from dominant culture and a lot of the policy and legislation that we'll go over next. And say an example of that is I have family who lived at Corindi, which is local to here, and the people actually set up a kind of little shanty town to begin with to avoid authorities, to be able to live kind of underneath the surveillance of people who are colonising them. That was a little further on, so, but these towns definitely had not many resources. Yeah, so I'm beginning to build a picture of, say, colonisation, Indigenous people being forced onto missions and reserves. This wasn't by choice, obviously. And actually, a lot of the buildings, a lot of the older infrastructure still exist on the missions and reserves till today. Everyone with me? Awesome. Okay. Like, I know that this content is like a little bit, it can be a little jarring and it's unpleasant, but it's just true. So I'm not going to read through every single point I'm making here. This is more just to give you a picture of, say, how this has led to current reality, and kind of the idea that colonisation and isn't something that just happened in the past. So it's something that was really ongoing. So this has real impacts on communities today, and will really affect the way that people engage with those communities, and how the more to the point, how communities will engage with them. Yeah? So, does anybody, has everybody heard of these kind of policies and legislation? I just kind of cherry-picked a few that was really relevant to today, really. So we'll start in Victoria in 1869, and actually any acts for the Protectionism Act, all of this kind of stuff was actually probably had a dual agenda. So the acts were made probably to protect Indigenous people from colonisation and from basically from massacre, but also to, once they got people together, they were able to then take the land and the resources that they were on originally. And so this became pretty much government policy legislation. So this was enshrined in law. And so what you're beginning to see here is Indigenous people were shuffled around and heavily overseen in these spaces. So there was a lot of authority in their life. So, you know, you couldn't talk language, you couldn't marry who you wanted to, and considering the complexity of kinship ties, this would have had a massive effect on people. You know, everything down to food, even when it came to assimilation, your children being able to remain in the family, all of this was under constant attack. So, you know, you can imagine begin to feel the resonance of how this is going to be affecting communities today. And I know I've included some from Queensland as well. I wanted to show that different states had different acts happening at different times. And Queensland was always a little behind the times, or forward in terms of their being able to marginalise so effectively. Who knows where the structure for apartheid in South Africa came from? It's a no-brainer. Yep.
WA.
Yeah. I thought it was Queensland, but it came from Australia. So really, when we start thinking about these things, the very basis of apartheid, we look at South Africa and go, oh, that's so behind. But actually, it originated from Australia. So, you know, we're really looking at spaces where people had no freedom and were heavily discriminated against. And then, of course, 1937 assimilation. And this was definitely... Does anyone know what kind of started around assimilation, one of the most harmful kind of policies so far in Australia with Indigenous people and families? The stolen generation. Yeah. So you can see they really had no space to even breathe. And then eventually, you know, the government basically had power over every aspect of their lives, and even like around the assimilation area, what actually happened was that families were often split up, and if people managed to escape from missions and reserves, they often set up little shanty towns for themselves where they were on the fringe of town, where they still couldn't get work, but there was, you know, they literally set up shacks where they had no infrastructure whatsoever. Yeah, so you can see that this is beginning to build a background and understanding of what these guys might be up against if they're moving in that space, where there's still places probably that don't have infrastructure that supports them to kind of be healthy. Yeah, so even I've got 1 minute to go. Oh no, I could talk for hours. Once I get over my nerves, that's it. Okay, so I suppose I'm kind of just beginning to wander into this stuff, yeah? So I've kind of covered that, the constant surveillance and interference from governments, so the mistrust that is now in communities, and how when services and organisations want to engage, for them, considering that, you know, the stolen generation ended around 1972, it's not in the past for them. Yeah, it's intergenerational and it's current. So that's what you're working with in communities. Of course, the social problems and intergenerational trauma, people tend to go into survival mode. So broader issues, say, as waste management, health issues, that kind of stuff kind of become diminished when you're just trying to survive day to day, and particularly when you're carrying the anxiety of the past. This one's a tricky one. I don't have much time left to talk. This is more around, if it was up to communities, they'd be living the way that they lived. As far as they're concerned, to some degree, white fellas came along and dirtied the environment. They would never have done that. And even though it's tricky because it's their rubbish, it's their waste, in some ways they wouldn't have to be dealing with that if they didn't have colonisation to contend with. And these are just to really, you know, it sounds difficult, and it is difficult. Or I should say not difficult, but complex. It has a lot of complexity in here. I love this one, and I could talk for hours, and I did talk for hours around this kind of stuff. This is really about workers working with their prejudices where they're up against in themselves, you know, around their attitudes. And of course, the infrastructure in communities having ongoing issues. Tash was sharing with me in, was it Bayugal? Bayugal, where they had an asbestos mine, and that people are still dealing with buildings with asbestos, the whole town's on asbestos. You know, just the issues around clearing that up from the past, you know, and that frustration, let alone moving on to like more progressive ways of caring for their places and spaces. 2 minutes over, awesome. Okay. So as far as I know, Danielle and Kate are going to give present some slides. They've got some beautiful pictures, and I'll let Danielle take over.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming along this afternoon. It's good to see such a good audience. Waste Aid approached the EPA about 2 years ago talking about waste issues on the discrete communities, which is what we call the former missions and reserves. They brought with them stakeholders like health and Aboriginal affairs, and I'd like to thank Anne Prince, particularly as the founder of Waste Aid, for bringing this to our attention, so as you did over and over again, until we were very engaged in the space. Very engaged. Okay. So we started looking at these issues a couple of years ago. And these are really some of the photos and some of the places that we've been. It's an extremely complex issue, challenge, it's a challenge. And just before I came in here today, I was thinking there's another big challenge to do with this that is not even up here, is that different government policies and practices like CDP or community development programs have come into communities, and from what I'm hearing, that was very positive. There was equipment, there was waste collection, the community were engaged, but then that was withdrawn. And Trent was saying earlier that in some communities the waste just started piling up because there wasn't any way to transport it or deal with them themselves. So I'll just let you look at the rest of these pictures for the next couple of minutes, and then Tash is going to talk about her work on one of the pilot projects up this way or a bit further north. These are all our photos from places that we've been with Waste Aid and the EPA. Services not being tailored or meeting the community need is certainly one area that we'd like to engage more with councils about. I mean, who likes split bins with garbage and recycling on both in the one bin, you know? I mean, some of these services are just not working. Thankfully, metal prices are increasing and we can actually work with regional waste groups across the state to recycle cars and metal. And here's some of the great artwork that Waste Aid have been working on with communities out west. And the children at Brewarrina. And messages that the communities have come up with. Hey You Mob, but sort of special places for people to discuss how they feel about the environment and what they want. Thanks, Tash.
Hi. So my name's Tash, and I've been working in a couple of communities on a pilot project in the Northern Rivers. We've got one based at Molly Molly, which is near Woodinbong, near the New South Wales-Queensland border, and that's on the traditional lands of the Githable people, and also in Kyogle Shire, and that bin was from the community that you saw before. We've got some houses there with 15 people in them, and we've got one split bin for the house, so you can see why you get rubbish issues when you've only got one bin for 15 people. And then Cabbage Tree Island in Ballina, and that's on the lands of the Bundjalung people, and that one's based in Ballina Shire Council. So we got some funding through the EPA to work on these programs, but I'm not actually going to be talking specifically about what we're doing on those communities, more because Danielle's kind of covered that with the waste issues. I'm more talking about what are some of the core values that we've learned through the process about what's required when working with communities, Aboriginal communities. And it's just a snapshot because we've got 10 minutes.
So collaboration equals cooperative culture. And to do that, I think you need to be mindful of your own values. You need to build capacity and opportunity. You need to understand the Aboriginal communication method of deep listening. You need to allow time, and you need to be adaptive in the way you design things. So probably a friend when I was bushwalking recently said to me, "What's the most important thing?" And I said, "Okay, well," I was thinking about it. We were walking for 8 days, so I had a while to think about it. And then I said to her the next day, "Okay, being mindful of your own values has got to be the most important thing in this work when you're a non-Aboriginal person coming in to Aboriginal culture." And so what does that include and what's it about? So what are your cultural values? What do you value? Do you value to be successful? Do you want to achieve in your life? How do you value work versus family? Do you want to work towards a comfortable home and a good job? Are these things that are important to you? Language and communication. Is English your first language at home? Or do you speak other languages? Do you expect people to respond to you promptly when you talk to them? Is that the way you communicate? Do you expect people to respond to an email and to a text message within a set period of time, or otherwise you think, that's a bit rude? Are they going to respond? Customs. Do you go in and do you shake people's hands? Do you look people in the eye and want people to look back with you in the eye? What about manners? Do you expect people to say thank you and please when you offer things? What's your worldview? Does it encompass spirituality? Is it framed by a religion? Is your knowledge base informed from a university education? All these things are going to make the different way that you interact in the world. What's your history? And how does this affect your outlook on the world? What's your understanding of Australian history? Is it informed from a 10, 20-year-old or longer education at high school, at university? Because there's a lot more information out there now. And you can guarantee if you're relying on that it's grossly misrepresenting and undervaluing Aboriginal culture and their economy. What kind of environment did you grow up in? Did you grow up in a comfortable and safe home? Did you have choices and opportunity? All these things come together to make up the way and the lens that you see the world through. And we find from these values that we judge and that we have expectations in the way we think things should go and the way people should work. So to create a collaborative environment in a cross-cultural setting, we need to understand how our cultural lens impacts the way we work and become mindful of how we are imposing our values on others. Once we understand ourselves, we're in a better position to learn and understand about another culture. Okay, a few other things. So building capacity and creating opportunity. First, you need to look at your own organisation and the people that are working in these programs. You need to build their cultural awareness, not only the people that are going into community, but within your organisation, so you're raising awareness of these issues. Providing training opportunities is really important out on the missions and reserves. A lot of them are quite isolated. But if you're going to do that, you need to also provide support and mentors, because a lot of people, if they're going to fulfil their training opportunity, it's going to be really difficult for them. So you need to set up strategies to help them to achieve that. And a paramount of the EPA program and in all programs needs to be about creating jobs for the people in the community. You've got to allow time. You've got to allow time to develop the relationships, because they take time. You've got to have face-to-face contact, and you've got to develop the trust and respect. People have to trust you before they'll share their stories with you. I've been out at Mooley for over a year now, and every time that I go there, the community tells me just another little bit of the story. It's like they'll never give me the whole picture up front, but they'll just offer me another bit So it just makes understanding what to do and how to go about designing the project that much more difficult, but that's where you've got to allow the time for these things to come out. You've got to sit around and have a cup of tea with people. You've got to tell them about your family and they'll tell you about yours. Like Amber referred to, it's very complex, the community dynamics, and complex about what's going on for people. You've got to understand who are the people you need to communicate with, who are all the elders, who are the families, who's got disputes with who, because it's going on out there. And if you don't understand that, you're probably going to step on people's toes. And that takes time. Communication. The number of people you literally have to communicate with is so much greater than in any other project that I've worked on. So that takes time. You've got to be adaptive. You've got to be responsive and open to change in the way that you design things. You'll try things, you'll have ideas, and they won't take off, even though people will tell you it's a good idea. You've got to identify the knowledge gaps that inhibit understanding. So this has come up on Mully with asbestos on the community. And when I took the woman that we're working with up the back and we were mapping out where all the asbestos was so that we could get a quote done on how to clean it up, she'd been in the meetings, we'd talked about asbestos, she knew that it was dangerous, but it wasn't until we went up the back and then I pointed out to her all the little bits. She said, oh, that's what we used to pick up and write on the cars, like chalk. And she's like, oh, I didn't realise that was what asbestos was. So, you have this understanding that people understand these things and they don't. So you've got to hear that. So in that program now, a big part of it is going to be working with kids understanding what asbestos is so that they don't continue that kind of dangerous thing where they're going to be exposed to those fibres. You've got to allow for delays because they definitely happen. And Danielle's been very supportive and open-minded to our delays that have gone on. You've never got to assume you know the best solution because the reality is you don't. And you've really got to listen to people and listen to what their suggestions are. So deep listening. This is part of listening to people and hearing what they're saying. Didiri is an Aboriginal word that means listening to one another. And it's a word that probably would have been in every Aboriginal language across the country. In the Gumbanga language, the local language, they say listening means hearing, learning, understanding, and knowing from the heart. So you can hear that it's a very different concept to what listening means to us in English. It's a much deeper kind of meaning. Active listening skills. So this is what deep listening skills are about. It means giving your full attention to the speaker. It means not interrupting people. Not assuming that you understand what they're talking about. Observing their body language, because communication will be in their body language as well. Observing their tone of voice, because that's also going to be telling you something. Allowing silence and being comfortable with that between talking. And actively asking questions to clarify your understanding. So just to finish on, one of the elders from the Nangkurika, Miriam Rose, she was a pioneer in spreading the concept of deep listening to the Western world and across to people that were working with Aboriginal people. And I just want to read one of her quotes on deep listening. Our Aboriginal culture has taught us to be still and to wait. We do not try to hurry things up. We let them follow their natural course like the seasons. There is nothing more important that we are attending to. There is nothing more urgent that we must hurry away from. Thanks.
Thank you, Tash. That was really nice. Really enjoyed that. Yeah. Thank you. So we have... Oh, excuse me for a minute. Did you need to give... Yeah, do you want to stay seated? Okay, so Danielle's just going to give us a little more of a talk here, so...
Thank you. I'm very pleased to say that the EPA has committed $5 million funding for the discrete communities over the next 4 years. We've been engaging with Waste Aid and North East Waste and land councils and local councils to design a program that we hope will have good outcomes. The program, for example, will include up to 6 months engaging with the community and the land council about the waste issues, about what they want, what they need, getting the quotes on board. So that's 6 months of engagement, and then the clean-up program, the project, may take anywhere between 6 to 18 months. So we're going to have staged projects over the next few years, but we definitely need your help. There are 61 discrete communities across the state, and there's one in each of these council areas. There's also obviously large Aboriginal populations in many councils that aren't mentioned here. There's also some councils that have many or several discrete communities as well. So we really need your help to work with us, because councils are an extremely important stakeholder in this picture. We want you to help us look at the services that are provided to the communities. Does everyone have a bin? Perhaps you can help out with a couple of public place bins near the picnic spot in the river. Perhaps you can help out with some metal bins that won't be burnt. We really need your help to look at the services, tailor the services, and hopefully be flexible so that we can make this a sustainable project. And I know many councils are doing fabulous work in this space, and I really thank you all for being here this afternoon.
Thanks, Danielle. So we're basically going to open the space for you to ask any questions. Given the interesting roles and the great information this panel has, I really encourage you to take advantage of having them here so you can, gain a little more knowledge. Yes.
This is more of a statement to Cash. I've been involved for some time with the Yorta people down on the Murray River, the Barn National Park. I've never heard a non-Indigenous person give it like you just gave. You understand it. But we've got to talk some more.
Thank you.
That knowledge is purely because I did Amber's cross-cultural training, actually. And others, but Amber really cemented that idea, and it's been really important, like in my understanding, yeah, so...
Pay your travelling expenses to come down to Victoria.
You got to take Amber.
Okay, keep them coming, yes.
So when trying to approach
an Indigenous community, where's the first place to start?
Yeah, so each of the discrete communities have a local Aboriginal land council in those areas. So probably the first point of call would be the CEOs there. So they actually in charge of the land council and the community and the reserve and that type of stuff. So they'd be the best point of call. I should say, for CEO's point of view, and just to let you know, they operate off a minimal budget. Like there's $140,000 each year to run a land council. Some land councils like Kempsey have 4 reserves within the area, They've got 78 residential properties that they've got to manage. It's not just the waste that they manage the roads, stormwater, the public areas, any public equipment like playgrounds and that are in there. So there's more than one job that they've got to deal with.
I would say go to them as well, go to the Land Council, don't invite them to the council chambers.
Keep them flowing. Yes, up the back.
Thank you. In terms of engaging in the education space, and you've obviously done a bit of work in the schools up there, what would really robust engagement strategy look like around caring for country? How would you go about starting something along that? Or what success have you had in those schools?
Kate from Waste Aid. So we've started developing education materials through basically co-design. So we start just asking people what they care about and what sorts of issues, what do they see the issues around waste, and how does that link again to caring to country and traditional notions of custodianship. So we've just started trialling basically the education materials that we have. So they're currently signs and things like that, but we're now looking at more interactive school workshops, which we'll be doing in May, and it's just around, and that's around sort of composting and reducing food waste. So it's really co-creating. It's absolutely essential because, like Tash and Amber were saying, that the way that we frame things and the things that we value and that are important, that we think are important, may be very different in communities, and also it's different across New South Wales. So I work in very remote communities in far western New South Wales, and it's probably very different where Tash works as well.
Can you give us an example of that? Like of something that's being co-created?
So one of the things that I'm creating is called a colouring out book, and so what that was actually based off is Impact Environmental actually have some colouring in books, and so I trialled those with the communities, but I actually found that there's too much text, and the younger kids particularly didn't engage with it. So when we were talking with community, there's an Aboriginal technique called stenciling, and so we started talking about that. How can we get the community engaged, and particularly the kids engaged around composting? So what we've actually designed is a colouring out book, which the kids get 3 posters. So there's a bin, a compost bin, and the dog, because in remote communities they don't have recycling. And they each pick up the stencils and they identify what kind of waste item that is and where it goes. And so they put it in a bin and then paint them and then remove them. So it's actually colouring outside the lines rather than a colouring inside the lines.
We're also, coming up in a few weeks, we're working with a group called Pea Media that have been around for 15 years, and they're coming to Muli and working with Woodinbong Public School to develop a rap song with the kids. So the elders were into the idea. They thought that was a good way to engage the teenage kind of age group. So 20 kids will be involved in that program, and watch this space because there's going to be a hit coming out of Muli soon. One of their past video clips we're going to show you, and it's been really successful on Triple J. So yeah, the kids are super excited. Well, no, actually they're a bit shy, but they will be super excited.
Just another couple of quick examples. Angonia, which is 40 minutes north of Burke, the school wrote a rubbish song. I'm sure you can Google it, but it's on YouTube. So it's a song that the whole school sang that was written about rubbish. And they also videoed themselves, and that was pretty fabulous. As well as community barbecues and workshops with local artists, and actually having the community and the school developing their own artwork. So the signs that were shown on the photos, they were all developed by the local community. So that's like a whole day event where you're engaging with the community about the environment and about waste and what they want to say and what it looks like.
Thanks, Danielle. Okay, well, thank you so much. Oh, we've got one more question. I was going to ask if there was one more. Yes.
I was actually going to ask, what's the most enjoyable thing working with Aboriginal communities, Tash?
They are so funny. They love to tell jokes, so it's often quite humorous hanging out with the elders. And just, yeah, it's really, I feel so grateful, like at times, like the stories people tell me. Recently, one of the women, and we applied for a conference, Danielle and I, to go to the Aboriginal Health Conference, and we asked Salome, who's working with me there, if she'd like to come along with us, and it's up in Cairns. And she said to me, "Oh, I don't know, you're going to have to, you're going to stay with me?" And I said, yeah, I'll stay with you. Why? And she said, "Oh, well, I'm single, and when I go up there, the men are going to sing to me, and I'm just not going to be able to come home." And I said, oh, it just made me laugh. I was just laughing, and I just felt so like touched. I thought just being exposed to somebody else's culture, them letting you in, and it's such a privilege, yeah. And so I said to her, she's going to have to teach me her local song so I can sing to her, so I can bring her back. So that's the deal. I've got to learn her song, and I can sing her back to her country. Yeah.
And you, Kate?
We haven't been accepted yet, but hopefully we do.
Like Tash said, I think it's really being involved in the community, learning sort of new things and people's stories and getting to know people. Because I guess the main thing for me is that it's our jobs, but it's these people's lives, and I think it's really valuable and special to be led into someone's life and shown such positive, wonderful stories and humour. It's fantastic. Oh, and a lot of Aboriginal meetings I've been to end in hugs, which is fantastic. I don't often get that.
I'll have to say something now. It's such a privilege to be called somebody's sister, when you get to know somebody well, just such warmth and love, and to be, you're my sister now, which is fabulous, and definitely the humour. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much to everyone here for being such an interactive and attentive audience. Really appreciate all of your questions and everything. And also let's give a big round of applause to our interesting, fabulous panel here. We have one final thing.
Just with one of the history points that actually wasn't noted up there is that when local Aboriginal land councils were created in 1983, reserves were managed by the Land Trust. Now we call it the greatest flick pass in history, because all these blackfellas are going, yeah, land rights, we've got all these reserves, but no funding come with it. So you can imagine communities, they've taken over full responsibility without any resources, if that was me, I wouldn't be able to manage a mission. So that's part of the history that people don't think. Although it is land, yeah, that's great, all those other responsibilities come with it, and without the resources, it becomes very hard.
Thanks, Trent. Okay. For those of you who are going to be hanging around, we've got an excellent film clip coming up after this of the Desert Pea Media, and they are awesome. Honestly, because they've done quite a few, hey? Yeah. Yeah, 15 years, and they're just, all of their film clips are just so full of heart, and they're really quite professional and beautiful. Yeah, the kids look like they're enjoying themselves. Cool.
3 minutes. Goes for 3 minutes.
Yeah. Shall I just put it on?
Yep.
Yeah. If there's music, you've got to get up and dance, though. No, I'm serious. I'll be coming around there.